Need to talk through some problems? You can try talking to a robot or a Woebot. Hi there, everyone. I'm Jeff, and this is Plain English lesson number 560. JR is the producer, and he has uploaded the full lesson content to plainenglish.com/560. Coming up today, woe, W-O-E. That's a word that means difficulty, sorrow, distress, sadness, trouble, things like that. We don't use that word very much, but most English speakers know what it means. Well, today we'll be talking about a chat app called Woebot. In other words, a robot for talking about your woes, for talking about your difficulties. Woebot is a mental health chat app, and today we'll be talking about how it works and whether it's worth it. In the second half of the lesson, we'll explore the English expression cracks in the system, and we have a quote of the week. Let's dive in. The pandemic exposed a few cracks in the mental health system worldwide. First, more people need mental health care than are currently in treatment. And second, treatment is not always accessible or convenient. Especially in rural areas, the nearest specialist may be miles and miles away. Then there are the age-old issues, the long stigma of seeking help for mental health issues, and the high price of treatment for those without insurance or government benefits. A new generation of chatbots aims to fill some of these cracks. It's important to say some. The chatbots we'll talk about today do not pretend to replace the relationship between a patient and a therapist. Instead, they aim to provide service to people who might not otherwise be able to see a therapist or who might be new to therapy. They're for people who need some general coaching or guidance. Let's start with what they are. Chatbots are app-based tools that provide advice, exercises, and general counseling. The apps aren't appropriate for serious issues like schizophrenia or suicidal thoughts, and the apps don't claim to be. But for everyday issues like anxiety, stress, and difficulty in relationships, they can be helpful. From a user's perspective, it feels like having a conversation. There are no long articles to read, just quick messages that feel like what you might get from a friend. And after you receive and read a message, it either gives you a few potential responses or it prompts you to write an answer in your own words. There is a small element of artificial intelligence involved, but not a whole lot. For example, if you tell Woebot a problem, it analyzes your speech and suggests the topics that might relate to your problem. I said, I feel like I'm having the same argument with someone over and over in my head. Woebot asked if my problems were related to stress and anxiety. That wasn't exactly right. I tried a few other prompts and it got closer. That was the extent of the artificial intelligence used in the experience, at least as far as I can tell. There might be more behind the scenes. The real strength, though, was in the branching logic of the chatbot. For example, it would ask you questions and give you a few suggested responses. The next messages you get would depend on the response you had chosen earlier. Woebot remembers the exercises you've done in the past, so when you revisit a topic, it gives you more advanced exercises or messaging so you never feel like you're getting repetitive content. By asking questions and noting your answers and remembering what you've said before, it can get a sense of your thoughts and feelings and then guide you through a process to adjust your thoughts and feel better. I did a module designed to help with trouble in a relationship, either a friend, family member, or romantic partner. Through a series of questions, Woebot determined that I was unhappy with something, but that I was not comfortable asking for what I wanted. So first, it educated me on different communication styles. Then, it guided me through planning a conversation designed to get the best outcome. It helped me identify the problem, determine what I wanted, and plan a constructive and respectful conversation. The interactions were all about 5 minutes long. After an interaction, it pauses to ask if you'd like to continue or resume the next day. I found that 1 or 2 interactions, 15 minutes max, was about all I really wanted, but I could return to it every day. So you can see how this might be a complement to, and not a replacement for, traditional therapy. Clearly, there's no human relationship involved, and the bot will only provide the resources that it has been programmed to provide. But traditional therapy is often a 50-minute appointment once a week. A chatbot interaction can be 5 minutes once a day, or however often the user wants. The frequency and method of delivery are different. This can help keep a user on track in between traditional appointments. And the chatbot is programmed with a lot of commonly accepted techniques that therapists use. So these can be helpful by reminding a patient of what's already been discussed in therapy, or it can raise ideas or conversation topics for a future appointment. Woebot has about 100 people on staff, but it has counseled over 1.5 million users. Whatever the app's shortcomings, you can't beat the leverage model. A lot of its users are in places where traditional therapy isn't available. There are other people who just don't have anyone to talk to, and they need an outlet for their thoughts. And don't discount this. A lot of people are afraid or ashamed to seek mental health care, or they think seeing a therapist is for people who are weak. But some of those people might be willing to start using an app, and they might be surprised that mental health care doesn't fit the stereotype they may have previously believed in. I can also imagine in the future that a chatbot app can be used more directly in a therapy environment. So, for example, a therapist in an in-person session might identify a path for a user to go down during the rest of the week and activate a certain path for a patient. Now, I definitely would have wanted this. So imagine you have a 50-minute session with a therapist on a Monday. You cover some ground, and the therapist wishes she could talk to you for another hour about what she knows on a certain topic. Now, instead of waiting until the next week, she could activate a module or something on my app, and I can practice relevant techniques, watch informative videos, track my mood, whatever, during the week. Now, as my favorite therapist podcasters say, you don't have to think of either or, you can think of both and. So we don't have to think of either in-person counseling or a chatbot. Both can work well, especially if someday they work together. A crack in the system is a weakness or a flaw in a system. If there are cracks in the system, then a system or organization does not work as well as it should. And if you identify cracks in the system, you should try to fill them. You should try to make the system better. Because if you leave cracks in the system, then there could be big problems down the line. Silicon Valley Bank just failed. It was the second biggest bank failure in American history. And it happened just now, just last month. We're not in a recession. There wasn't a big financial crisis. The bank met all the regulatory requirements. On a Thursday, its stock was worth $200 per share. On a Friday morning at 9:00 a.m., its stock was worth $0, and it had been taken over by the government, shut down overnight. Now, a lot of people woke up on Friday and they said, What? The 16th biggest bank in the country failed overnight. And get this, it met all the regulatory requirements it was supposed to meet. It had enough capital. It had enough liquidity. As far as the government was concerned, it was in fine health until it wasn't. In hindsight, we can see there were cracks in the system. Silicon Valley Bank had some weaknesses that it never had to disclose and that the government never monitored. The details are complex, too complex to discuss now, but they weren't unheard of risks. So listen, a bank should not fail overnight in a strong economy. This is just not something that should happen. We have systems to prevent this, but there were cracks in the system. There were weaknesses in the system, and that led to negative consequences. The pandemic exposed some cracks in the mental health care system, probably around the world, but especially in the US. More than half of American counties don't have a single psychiatrist. A lot of counties are sparsely populated. You might have to drive hours to see a therapist who has an opening. And that's if you have insurance. A lot of people can't get the time off work. They live too far away. They can't afford to pay, or they live in areas without enough practitioners. And the problems are worse if they need specialty care for, say, addictions. Now, these problems always existed, but the pandemic exposed cracks in the system. The pandemic made people see and recognize the cracks in the system, the weaknesses in the system. Why? For one thing, more people needed mental health care, so more people were thinking about it. For another, people in cities couldn't go into the office in pandemic times, so it made them think more about how difficult it is for people in rural areas to go to an office in normal times. Here's another example. The US government funds a cash assistance program for the neediest residents. It's called Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, TANF. And if a family is eligible for TANF, it has a low income. So if your family has a very low income, if you're really struggling, you're eligible for TANF. Now, I said eligible. The depressing fact, a shameful fact really, is that only 28% of families eligible for this benefit actually get it. That means that out of every 10 families who have the right to get this cash assistance, only 3 actually get the money in their bank account. Talk about cracks in the system. The government passed a benefit. We all agree this benefit should be offered. And I bet 10 out of 10 needy families want the money, but fewer than 3 out of 10 get it. Why? 1, people don't know about it. 2, it's hard to get. You need to fill out forms with a pen, go to a government office in person during business hours, whatever. The government agency that gives out the money might not have enough caseworkers, so you might not be able to get an appointment even if you wanted one. If you don't have a bank account, it's harder to get the money, and so on. These are cracks in the system, weaknesses in the system. The system was designed to get money into the pockets of the neediest people to reduce poverty. The money is there, it's approved, it's ready to go, and yet it doesn't wind up getting delivered due to cracks in the system. Here's a quote of the week to go along with today's topic. Self-acceptance is truly a heroic act. That's by Nathaniel Branden. He was a psychotherapist and an expert on self-esteem. Self-acceptance is truly a heroic act, says Nathaniel Branden. That's the quote of the week, and that brings us to the end of today's Plain English. You might try Woebot just for some English practice too. It's not a bad thing to get a little extra training or a supplement to what you might know about mental health, and it's also a good opportunity to practice reading and responding to questions in English. I think we're learning these days that chat apps and artificial intelligence are very powerful and have some impressive capabilities, but they're a complement to, not a replacement for, real human interactions. And that's why we like to make things personal here at Plain English. You can ask ChatGPT what a word means, that's fine. But here, you get the context, you get stories, and the way you learn here makes you think. And when you think about topics in English, you are much more likely to remember them. Coming up on Thursday, activated charcoal is everywhere. It's a real medicine. It's also a supplement. It's added to toothpaste, soap, even cocktails. But what is this dark gray stuff? And is it any good for you? That's what we'll explore on Thursday. See you then.